I want to thank each and every one of you for taking some time today to join us. I'm your moderator, James Baker. I'm with the Public Sector Technology Exchange. For those of you that are not familiar with the Public Sector Technology Exchange, we're an independent venue, and we host national forums on the topics of technology in the government and higher education marketplaces. I'm glad that you can join us today. Before we begin, there's a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over, and then we'll get right into the panel discussion. One, the panelists are allowed to have bottled water, but the policy of the auditorium is that you can't have any drinks in here. So if you could kindly oblige the management, I'd be very appreciative. Today's event is going to be recorded. We will send everyone out an on-demand link. I would ask you to kindly, if you can mute your phones, tablets, computers. I just did mine because I figured I'd be the one having my phone go off. Your questions are very important to me, and let me just tell you a little bit about the format, how today's panel will work. I'm going to interview the panelists for the first hour of the forum. I have some questions that I want to ask them that are around the topics of security and visibility. After that, I'm going to open up the discussion to you, the audience. I'll be walking around with a mic. We also had, close to 30 questions come in through online registration, and our goal is to try to get to those. We'll wrap up the event right around 11. For many of you, you found a survey and some information on your chair. Your feedback is so important to me. An event like this just doesn't happen. We have gracious speakers that come. There's been a lot of coordination, and we sincerely want to hear from you. If you would be able to fill out that survey, as it's appropriate, we have a Pete's coffee and gift card for you in the back. You can see Kelly on that. I now want to give a special thanks to our sponsors today. Cisco, Dimension Data, and Gigamon. Their teams are here today. They have booths set up to the left, and I'm adamant that they can help you with about anything that has to do with security. You should go by and get a chance to talk with their teams and engineers that are here today. Without further ado, we are going to have our panel introduce themselves. I also wanted to make a quick comment. We were expecting to have Special Assistant Attorney General Justin Ehrlich here. I received a text last night at 11:04. Jimmy, flu's hit me, and I don't know about you, but we've had it running through our family, so I know there's a lot of stuff going on. They tried from 11 to 4 a.m. this morning to find another speaker. Unfortunately, they will not be here. However, I encourage you to go out and read Attorney General Kamala Harris's data breach report. It's quite intriguing. Now, what I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do, Larry, we'll start with you. If you could just kindly take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and what you do.
Okay. I'm Larry Gilbert. I'm Vice President and Chief Information Officer at Sacramento State, just down the street. Sacramento State, as some of you know, has 30,000 students, 2,500 employees, and at any given point in time, 20,000 applicants whose information we deal with. We take information security very seriously, not only at Sacramento State, but in the California State University system. When I started my job in 2007, we had a so-called executive order that mandated that we all develop information security policies and procedures and risk assessments and so forth and so on.
Thank you, Larry. And Jason?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Jason Harris. I'm the Managing Principal Consultant for Security for Dimension Data in the Americas. Dimension Data is a global solution integration company. Security is one of our key business units and service units. We're also part of the NTT group, so the threat intelligence report that I'll be referring to is actually a global group-wide report. And really my focus is on helping particularly C-level executives understand the real state of people, process, technology, security in our environment, building roadmaps that are actually achievable and deliver outcomes that are not just compliance-based.
Thank you. Tom.
Hello, my name is Tom McCrary, and I'm the Information Security and Privacy Officer at CalPERS, and welcome to our facility. Hopefully you're all comfortable. I, as you might expect, am responsible for information security and privacy. We've kind of organized into three functional areas. I have an area that deals with the management, policy, incident response, education, things of that nature. Have another area that deals with more of the technical aspects of cybersecurity, and those are the guys that have all the fun. And then I have a privacy area also because, I believe that privacy is probably an emerging area. It's fraught with regulations. It's going to be a very, very big deal. Most of you probably know what CalPERS is. CalPERS is it's a very large and, in fact, the largest public retirement system in the United States. We have approximately 1.5 million members, and we offer retirement benefits to those members. Not quite as well known as we also offer health benefits to those members. So we're probably the largest purchaser of health services, certainly in California. We have, and this is what's in the news all the time, is our investment portfolio. Is on behalf of our members, we manage a very large investment portfolio in the neighborhood of $300 billion, and we're a very active investor. We have a large footprint on Wall Street. We make a very diverse range of investments.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Mike.
Good morning. Michael Schilling. I'm the Vice Provost and CIO about 2 hours up the road, north of here at CSU Chico. So as Larry said, there's certainly a framework within CSU that guides security on all of the campus, but individually we are all collectively responsible for implementation and monitoring and such as that. So it's clearly a collaborative effort across my organization and across the campus. So thank you.
Appreciate you making the drive this morning. Steve.
Hey everyone, my name is Steve Camey. I'm a cybersecurity specialist for public sector at Cisco. I think most of us in this room know that Cisco is a 30-year-old technology company, obviously getting our start in networking. But cybersecurity is a huge focus of what Cisco does. So what I do here is help not only state and local, but also the federal government and so forth understand cybersecurity from a best practices perspective. All right, Cisco, everything that we do is aligned with best practices that come out of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm looking forward to the questions and an active discussion.
Thanks, Steve. Carlos.
Good morning. I'm Carlos Ramos, a recently retired state employee, so I'm really happy that Tom, for the work you're doing, and a graduate of Sac State, so go Hornets. Class of '86, by the way. So I'm a retired state employee. Just recently, I had a number of different positions in government as a departmental CIO, working in a project management office as a director, and then most recently as a state CIO. In my responsibilities as state CIO, I had the state's Chief Information Security Office as part of my organization, so I worked very closely with the state ISO, and then as CIO was also responsible for oversight of what other state agencies did, and then for disseminating IT policy, including IT security policy, and managing operations at an enterprise level for the state. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and the question and answers from the audience.
Thanks, Carlos. Ashes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashish Kumar. I work for California Housing Finance Agency as an information security officer. And unlike Carlos, or like Carlos, I will be retiring in about 20 years from now. So a little bit about the Housing Finance Agency. We've been in business since 1975 when Governor Brown first came into the office. And one of the primary goals is for us to find financing options for the low-income families so they can buy a house. So being an information security officer for that agency is very important because we have so many single-family loans and multifamily loans. What that means is we have to keep their information safe. So this is a very critical position for us, and like my counterpart Tom over there, basically sharing the information security responsibilities with state mandates.
Thank you. Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Tresh, and I'm a former state information security officer working with and for Carlos at one point. I left state service and went back to the military for a while, and then went back into IT security and was at the CISO for Orange County. And now I'm back at state service, and I'm the CIO for high-speed rail. Still have the passion for security, and with the mission we've got, putting together the rail delivery piece of this, making sure that security is the utmost and foremost as we build into things rather than after the fact. And having been, part of the state system and understanding some of the challenges we face, I just am trying to do my best to make sure that we don't face those same issues as we move forward with delivering the rail for high-speed rail.
Thanks, Keith. Jay.
My name is Jay So. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of California Highway Patrol, and I just kind of listened to Jim earlier says, don't just introduce your title, because we have a lot of CTO might doing things different. So what do you do? I'm also the Chief of Information Technology Section responsible for our data center infrastructure, and also our 3,000 patrol vehicle support statewide. So it's more than just technology. I want to say thanks, James, for the opportunity provided this platform to kind of talk about the most important issue of cybersecurity. And also, I really appreciated the opportunity to be here with our former CIO, Carlos Ramos, my mentor, and a lot of state leaders graduate from Carlos' academy, IT Leadership Academy. Thank you for all the education. So this is an opportunity for me to learn from all other state leaders and also from the audience as well. I will share some very unique perspective from CHP with regarding cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Ananda.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ananda Rajagopal, and I'm Vice President of Global Product Management at Gigamon. Been with the company for about a couple of years. Gigamon as a company was founded in 2004, and we went public in 2013. And we are the market share leader in an emerging space called network visibility. And essentially what we do is to help harness visibility using any information in motion for helping better security. Thank you, Jimmy, for hosting this panel, and thank you, everybody, for coming this morning.
Glad you're here. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Scarr, and I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Department of General Services. DGS in the state is actually made up of an amalgamate of departments in one, many different lines of business. So most of people know us because of the procurement activities that we do. But we also have the administrative law judges. We certify schools with the Division of State Architects. We have the full real estate management area as well, where we make sure all the state buildings are meeting expectations throughout the state. To facilitate this, we have 3,700 people at DGS, and we have an IT shop of about 125. So, and we have a presence in 69 different sites. So, anyway, it's a neat organization to work in. I like it because there's multiple different lines of businesses, so we have multiple different solutions to meet those business needs, and that means we get a whole variety of things to work on.
Thank you, Rebecca. Sean.
Good morning, and thank you, Jimmy, for hosting this. I am Sean Woodland. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for the Infrastructure Branch with the Department of Motor Vehicles, and of course the DMV is the agency that touches just about everyone's life here. We provide motor vehicle titling, registration services for the California population, as well as those driver licensing activities, driver testing, driver safety, those sorts of actions. We have approximately 286 locations statewide. So we're in every metropolitan area and many of those smaller locations. We're about 9,500 employees across the state, about 4,000 work in our field offices, interacting with our customers on any given day. We are an organization of, on the IT side, about 460. That number fluctuates by 20 or 30 on any given month. About 460 individuals, and within the infrastructure branch, we're about 180 of those people. And we provide all of the baseline services for the department: compute, communications, security, and of course, we have dedicated personnel to the privacy and security shops, and so we work closely with those in trying to protect the information on all those Californians to whom we're steward.
Thanks, Sean. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Cervantes, also retired from state service as the Chief IT Security Officer at DOJ. Began my state security career probably 22 years ago and founded the Interagency Security Group and chaired that for 20 years until my retirement. Served with Tom here at CalPERS as his counterpart in IT as the Chief IT Security Architect, and also as a CISO for the Board of Equalization, and then worked on a couple of large ERPs. I'm currently a security and privacy strategist at LinkSource Technologies in Roseville, and very much still involved in security and passionate about security and privacy.
Thank you, Stephanie. And just for our audience listening, let me just give you kind of a quick thumbnail of what we're going to hear. For about the next hour, I'm going to be interviewing the panelists. I have some questions for them. Then we're going to open it up to you all. We should have about 45 minutes where you all can interact with them. We had a number of questions coming in through registration. So once we have this moment here where I interview the panelists, we'll open it up to you all, the audience. But my first question, Carlos, it's for you. I think you need no introduction. Everyone here is familiar with you and what you've done. And this is probably the shortest question I've ever asked anyone. It's just 2 words. What's next?
What's next for me personally?
Yeah.
Well, I'd hope to open a bed and breakfast in Elk Grove, but nobody wants to travel to Elk Grove, so. So what I'm doing, I've actually already started. I've launched my own company. It's a new initiative to try and essentially do from outside of government what I was trying to do while I was inside of government, which is to try and bring in innovation or new technologies or new ways of thinking about technologies to the public sector, just without all the bureaucracy and politics. So what I've done is I'm working and partnering with some companies out of Silicon Valley, companies that have pretty, not bleeding edge, but pretty leading edge technologies, but that have been focused on the commercial sector, that maybe haven't turned their attention to working in the public sector, and helping to bridge that gap, to bring what they're doing that's kind of innovative and already proven in other areas, but to bring that into government.
Oh, that'd be just almost like an incubator type of.
Sort of an incubator, sort of a of a liaison even, because a lot of them find it very frustrating to do business with government, and a lot of them really just don't think government gets it. That we're always late to the game, which is partially true. We are late, but we're also looking for answers. We're looking for solutions in the public sector, and they're out there. So my focus is on bringing that into not only here in California at the state level, local level, and then with across the country as well.
My next question for you, and I think we all here are students of what's going on in the state. There's been a lot of change in security. We all read the audit report last summer. Then we had Attorney General Kamala Harris's report came out. There have been a lot of rumors flying around of what's going to happen with security. And could we have your opinion on what you think the future of security will be, how it'll look here in the state of California?
For California?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and I guess one of the nice things about being retired is I can actually speak my mind now. So I think there are a couple of things that are going to happen here in California. One is I think security is becoming more of a focal point, which I think is a really good thing. Whether it's because of the audits or just folks finally realizing that it's something that we need to pay attention to. So we're starting to pay attention to it as a state. You see that from the legislature in terms of some of the policies they're trying to do. You see that from some of the policy and decision makers, and you see it from folks that are just worried about being the next big headline of something that's gone wrong in government. So I think there's an increased focus. My former agency this year, for example, started doing cybersecurity compliance audits. Right? In the past, we were relying on self-reporting. We're recognizing that's not enough, so they're going to start doing cybersecurity compliance audits. They've actually already started. I think there's a focus at trying to emulate what the federal government is doing, which is coordinating more communication and information sharing, at least in the public sector, around threat surveillance and threat intelligence, which I think, again, is a good thing. Some of the things that I think are either not happening, which I think should be happening, or that are maybe starting to move down the path that I think are maybe in the wrong direction. One of the areas that I see folks considering from a policy perspective is breaking the ISO out and maybe putting into more of an emergency response sort of a placement, which I'm not sure is something I would recommend doing. One, because if you look at the responsibilities of the Emergency Services Agency, their fundamental job is to respond and to recover after something has happened. Right? And so I think that's not necessarily the right focus. I think really what we have to do is be more proactive about preventing something bad from happening. And along that line, one of the things that I think the state still hasn't done and really needs to focus on is understanding what are the fundamental exposures that we already have and that we're aware of, and address them. And in my experience, a lot of the exposure that we have comes from having, outdated technologies, having, an infrastructure that needs to be modernized and hardened. And so I think the state needs to make more of an investment into going to agencies and departments and saying, okay, if you're on old technologies, on unsupported software, on solutions that are kind of built before cybersecurity was really a consideration, let's look at how we move those from where they are today to something more modern, more hardened, and that's built with security in mind. I think the state's still missing the ball on that. So my hope is that with all this increased focus, that we'll get more resources for information security officers and their staff, more training and development for IT operational staff so that they're aware of not only good security practices, but also some actual investment in bringing the technology and the infrastructure that we have and that we rely on up to date.
Thank you, Carlos. Sean, I'm going to switch gears. We're going to head over to DMV now. One of the questions I have for you is, how has the changing landscape threat affected the manner in which you respond to the overarching cybersecurity problem that exists?
So, of course, at DMV, we take security very, very seriously. We are subject to some of those very things that Carlos mentioned, the legacy systems. Through just the years, we've come to a point where we have to support a number of different technologies that that were prior to the threat landscape that we see today, and so it is a challenge. But it's certainly one of those challenges that I think we're positioned to address. So our focus to date has been one of really focusing in on hosts, or focusing in on the perimeter, or focusing in on these the actors that may be trying to get into our environment or exfiltrate information out of our environment. We haven't taken the position that there is also that communications component that goes along with that information sharing piece, that once we see a zero-day threat, or once anyone sees a zero-day threat, how quickly can we get that information to propagate to all those systems that may be impacted by that sort of threat. And so for us, we believe that the tools exist today. Whether they're advanced tools in emerging now, or whether they're the current tools that we have today, there's a paradigm shift that has to happen in the way that we respond to the threat. We can't take the legacy way of simply responding after the fact. And so we have to get in front of that. And the question, how do we get in front of that? We get in front of that by, for us, it's dedicating resources. We've historically allowed our maintenance and operations personnel to perform those security functions. And that increases that lag time between infection and detection. And so we're putting the resources, the human capital, in front of that today so that we can shorten that time frame between infection and detection. So for us, it really is the way that we're responding to the changing threat landscape is to change our paradigm, is to change the way that we view it. We can't view it through the old eyes. That is of simply responding once something has occurred. We have to be real time. We have to be in front of it, and we have to begin sharing information out to our sister agencies, whether it's Office of Emergency Services or OTEC. We have to be able to get information that's applicable for all of those systems at the right time.
Could you give us an example how you all have evolved? I know we have a lot of people here that have similar situations. You have a platform, an existing platform that you're building off of. You're trying to meet the changes that are coming. Share with us an example how DMV has evolved.
Well, last year we approached the legislature in a finance letter for funding to establish a real-time, a 24/7 security operations center. And so in doing that, at that point we recognized that we really did have the majority of the tools that we needed to shift our thinking into an aggressive review state rather than being passive. And so we received approval for establishing that SOC, and we're hiring personnel as we speak to staff up that SOC. And we're working today to build those relationships with the organization so that we can do that information sharing in order to address this. But the truth is, I read something recently in MIT Technology Review, and it related to this notion of AI squared. AI being one, the artificial intelligence that we have that allows us to do some of that behavioral analysis, some of the analysis on our infrastructure in order to understand where those potential threats are coming from. But that's only one piece of it. On the other side of that, we have to have the analyst intuition. And so that's the second AI that brings it to AI squared. That analyst intuition, that thought that person that is that security analyst that's taking a look at that information coming out of that system, they have to be able to carry that information out to the nth degree, to be able to understand if there is a threat, what that threat is, and what action to take. And so we're positioning ourselves to do just that sort of thing and share that information out with other agencies.
Thanks, Sean. I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions coming your way when you get to open up the audience. I want to shift over now. We're going to leave DMV, and we're going to head over to California Highway Patrol. You know, Jay, this is a very interesting, a lot of you may not know this, but California Highway Patrol is the lead investigative unit on all cyber crimes here in the state. Jay, could you share with us, how did you all become the stakeholder of that? Why is it your organization that does that?
All right, this probably traces back to the history of in 1995, CHP merged with the state police. So CHP is not just responsible for the public safety on highway, and also is for all California state property and also any government agency property. So after the merge, and then there is a government order authorized CHP to be the first emergency response reporting stakeholder. So any computer crime occurred on state property involve computer resources. The first reporting agency is the CHP Emergency Response and the Tactical Alert Center, INTAC. Information is available on the California Technology website and on the CHP website. So CHP is the, I would say, the first line of reporting. I'm not saying defense. Sometimes the incident might already happen, but it is crucial to report as early as possible, and then we can begin to have the process and also provide help, because which a lot of smaller agencies, they might not have resources to handle cybercrime or computer crime incidents.
What are the key areas you look at in an investigation? So, you get an alert, agency ABC has a security breach. What are some of the key areas that you go like when you're the lead on those investigations?
So there is a list of incidents recommend or required to report, such as illegal access of personal information and unauthorized access of state computer devices, and also lost or stolen computer devices, and of course physical breach, and which impact all the computer data integrity on the state facilities. All of this and all of those are crucial to report as early as possible. I believe one of the advice is when you report it, to provide as much information as possible and save the data. This is a computer crime is no different than other physical crime. Evidence is very important. We got a lot of situation. A reporting agency or entity already clean up everything. Once a reported incident, it's very hard for you to do any investigation. So save the data and report as early as possible. It's very crucial.
Thanks a lot, Jay. Going to head over to Jason. Jason, you work with many customers throughout the country. Is there a secret in creating a solution that really works and keeps intruders away from your nexus? Do we throw more money at it? Do we beef up security? I mean, you have a wide breadth of the different organizations.
So if there was, I'd already be retired. That's the first thing to say. So the reality is no, there isn't. What the process that we've adopted really just started a few years ago was when we were consistently seeing organizations that were spending significant amount of money on security technologies. We'd assess them 1 year, we'd go back and assess them the following year with penetration testing, et cetera, and we'd actually find that they hadn't improved. We're also finding that when we carried out those kind of assessments, that the principal weaknesses that we identified, and also when we carried out incident response, was more in weaknesses in people and process than necessarily technology. And that really is, a lot of that is linked to technologies are in place, but the people and process side of running that technology, optimizing it, making the best use out of it, sort of hadn't really been followed through. So we developed a framework that we use for all clients. It applies to all industry verticals. As an example is a snapshot. We've carried out 57 of these assessments over about the last year in 14 countries across 16 verticals. What that gives us is really a good benchmark of the challenges that all organizations are facing. And there's some sort of key elements that have come out of that, which is most clients, and I've kind of heard some of that here as well, is are really still struggling with defining what their clear security plan is that's aligned to the business objectives. That's one thing that I stress with all clients when I'm dealing with most of my C-level clients, is actually trying to understand what are the business objectives. Every company, every industry, every agency has different objectives. How does existing security architecture and processes line up with those objectives and support those objectives? Roles and responsibilities generally, we've, through this process, we found are fairly well defined within organizations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the process and the policies support those roles to achieve the right outcome. Predictably, we've seen as well, policy and compliance has the highest maturity score when we carry out these assessments, because everyone's been beaten to death with compliance over the last few years. Obviously now we're seeing the wave of NIST compliance, which is even a harder compliance regime. As you can see, we carried out these engagements worldwide. We've carried out a lot now in North America in particular. So we've got some good data that we've seen. And really, every single one of those, pretty much, we find that it's a focus on developing security strategy, risk management processes that are tied into IT. That is where the biggest area for improvement is. Usually, we find there are some missing technologies that we'd recommend, but really, the people and process side, how do you bring all that data together? You had a good point about building a SOC. Building a SOC is a key objective, or using somebody else for your SOC services. Basically, how do you gather all that data, analyze it, make it useful? So we always use this mantra of visibility, awareness, and protection. You can't protect what you're not aware of. If you don't have the visibility, you can't protect that. And some of the things that we're seeing still is that, a good example here of matching up our global threat intelligence report data with what we're actually seeing when we're carrying out these assessments, is that public sector has a significant number of the engagements we're carrying out is for public sector. We're also seeing that, particularly for malware, 18% of all malware attacks over the last year have targeted government specifically, and we've seen an 18% in malware attacks as well. So we're seeing increasing malware attacks. Government has shifted right to the top of the stack as being the biggest target, and we all know the reason why that is because government has the biggest stash of personally identifiable information. Hackers have shifted their focus away from credit card information to, if I can get somebody's user identity, their identity, I can just keep cloning that identity, carry out fraud. It's very hard to track that down. Impacts your constituents very directly when they're subject to data theft. And we've seen a big shift as well to the end user is the target now. So big increase in spear phishing attacks. We've also seen a huge increase in the number of vulnerabilities to things like Adobe Flash, that it's targeting the end user. So over the last year, as an example, Adobe Flash had an increase of 312% more vulnerabilities than the previous year. So that's partly because people are actively looking, how can I compromise these smaller end user apps that are largely not under the control of IT? So generally, IT doesn't have control over a lot of those smaller apps. They're the soft entry point in for a user.
You made a very interesting point. Government has a big target on it right now. Y'all today who came in, Dimension Data kindly, as a courtesy, provided copies of their 2016 Threat Intelligence Report. I wanted to ask you, we have a crowd today of government education. Where do government and education really rank? You'd mentioned that government is pretty high up there on the list.
So overall, if you combine, it depends on how you classify it. Some clients will classify education as part of government. But generally speaking, 15% of all of the attacks that we're seeing globally are targeting government and education. Okay. So obviously financial services is still one of the biggest targets, predictably. But public sector has shifted up right the way to the top, so number 2. So what we're really saying is the threat is very real. 65% of all those global attacks are originating in the US. That looks like the US is attacking itself, but the reality of it is a lot of those attacks are actually Eastern European based. I'm going to put it out there, it's Eastern Europe. Eastern European based hackers that are just using weaker systems in the US as jump points.
Interesting. I appreciate that, and I encourage everyone to, if you didn't get pick up a copy of that report, to do so. I'm going to shift gears now, and we're going to head over to Ashish. Last year, Governor Brown signed Assembly Bill 670 that mandates a minimum number of cybersecurity risk assessments are performed on state networks each year. Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. This Assembly Bill 670 is the most talked about topic right now in state security and the IT community right now. And Carlos mentioned something earlier on, and he mentioned that CDT has, there was a comment he made about CDT is having more audit responsibility, more compliance responsibility towards having states report on certain things. And this bill kind of touches on that. So a little bit about this bill. The bill was passed in October of 2015, relatively new, and allows 35 independent cybersecurity assessments to be done by an independent assessor. Now, traditionally, state entities are required to do information security risk assessment every other year and report on it. And many times, if it's just a simple form, you say that your state has done it and you put a check mark on it. Or you say that you haven't done it and you come up with a remediation plan on working on it. So what this bill does is it allows the California Information Security Office and the California Department of Technology to send an independent auditor or have an independent auditor, and the independent auditor that the bill talks about is using California Military Division to do this. However, there's an exemption process, so if your state entity has been using another internal or external auditor that specializes in risk assessment or for information security, you could go through the exemption process. But this bill kind of touches base on that a little bit.
Thank you for that. My next question to you is that you're part of an IT Leadership Academy, and you're working on a class project right now for the California Security Jumpstart. I have a two-part question for you. Please tell us a little bit about what the program is. And then my second question is, how do you see the California Security Jumpstart project that you're doing benefiting all state entities? So tell us a little bit about the program, your project, which I found fascinating, and then how that could benefit some of the other state groups that are here.
There are some ITLA members out here. Jay is sitting over here. So those are some of the past ITLA members. So the ITLA stands for Information Technology Leadership Academy, and it's a 9-month-long program, and the focus is building IT leadership, next generation leadership. So when the first day in the class, Carlos had an opening speech, and he mentioned the term silver tsunami. Silver tsunami is, and right here, he's an example, he retired. So finding people to, grooming the leaders, grooming the next generation IT state leaders, and kind of getting them ready for the next position that might open up. So this year's program has 25 different state entities participating in it, and traditionally the class selects a project that you could work on. There are two distinct projects that we are doing this year. The first is the California Mentorship Program, and the second that I am part of, and there are some of my team members are in the audience, and they are part of, is the California Security Jumpstart Program. The second part of that is how do we see that this project benefiting the state service or state entities? This project is very dear to my heart because being information security officers, when having a conversation with my peers, we share stories about resources, we share stories about clarity on some policies that needs to be done. So this is just a small contribution towards that effort. The tool will allow, the focus is, the two main focuses for this project. The first focus is asset protection. We are designing tools that will allow state entities to perform classification, categorization, and risk assessment. So these are how-to tools that state entities can leverage. And then the second part of this project is building security requirements throughout the system development life cycle. Many a times, as a security officer, when the project is really ready to get pushed out, I may be approached by the project team to simply sign on a project saying that it's ready to go. However, in reviewing through the project, there are many security controls that are missing, and kind of puts me in an awkward position in pushing that project forward, and then we get blamed for putting a hold on the project. So the purpose is implementing or pushing security controls throughout the business requirement cycle or throughout the system development life cycle. So those are the two efforts that we are working on the California Information Security Jumpstart Program, or the project. We plan on pushing the project out. Right now, it's in a beta phase. The plan is that we will push it out at our graduation, which is June 10th, and then the hard push will be somewhere down 2 months down the road, and which will be a tool that you could leverage. And I would also like to recognize that the project was also, we already have an award on the project, and still in the part of getting developed right now. So a few weeks ago, we were awarded with a leadership award on this particular project. So it's gaining ground. So I would urge you, so as soon as it comes out, we will leverage our ISO group, I will leverage our business community, and then we'll send the links out, and we can have you guys see it and use it.
Yeah, and please let us know at the PSTE. We'll send a update out to our network.
Absolutely.
I'm going to shift over now to Ananda. Typically when an attacker comes into a network, they come in one point and then they hop all around. They go from one place to the other. Everyone in this audience, if you haven't shopped at Target this week, you're probably going to. We've all know the Target story, what happened. It's very near and dear to us. But I was hoping that you could explain to us, a lot of times people don't fully understand. We know Target got hacked. It was a big deal. Hey, I shopped there, but that's about as far as we go. Could you share with us a little more details behind that attack?
Sure, Jimmy. So first of all, I think it's useful to, right here, it's useful to look at the different stages in a kill chain, right? Oftentimes the attacker's activity starts off with reconnaissance. There is the zero-day attack, and either with spear phishing or phishing. And then once that's done, once you have that hook, there's a backdoor that's established. And typically, that's when a command and control communication with an external botnet or with an external server begins to start happening. This is very low and slow communication. It's not something that you would see as a very high volume of activity at that point in time, but it's a very critical stage of establishing that backdoor to that external botnet. But after that, one of the things which attackers do today is to make sure that even if they are caught on that specific system, establish multiple anchor points. And how they do that is by having lateral movement, which is move across the organization and establish, you can think of it as anchor points across multiple user workstations or multiple systems in the infrastructure. Then, of course, there's data gathering, and finally, the damage is done when exfiltration actually happens. So let's go back now to Target. And the point here is not to pick on Target as an organization, but rather to see how this translates into real life. And for simplicity purposes, I'll break it down into 4 things. The way it was done was, it's a pretty well-known fact that credentials of a HVAC subcontractor were used to break into the organization. But what is less known is how they were used in order to break into the organization and have lateral movement. So first of all, the attacker used the victim's virtualized application server to break into the target environment. And valid credentials were used to break into it. Once that was done, this happened in the DMZ. Once that was done, they broke out of that virtualized app environment and moved into the corporate environment, where they began to start harvesting data from the systems that were in the corporate environment. They then moved further on into the point-of-sale registers, where the retail domain controller was used to pivot to the point-of-sale registers. And that is the place where card harvesting malware was installed in order to start collecting the track data from the POS point-of-sale registers, which is where we often swipe our credit cards. After that was done, the data that was collected, the track data, was transferred from the retail domain controller to a user workstation, and finally FTP was used to transfer the data, the PII information from the environment into an external host. So what you see here is a very deliberate set of activities which were performed, where because of the freedom to move laterally inside the enterprise, it really became very simple for the attacker to succeed. Now, while activities have become much more sophisticated of late, I would say that even if you look at the most recent Verizon DBIR report, the data breach investigation report that came out in about 2 months back or so, one of the worrisome things is the time to infection and the time to compromise is shortening quite dramatically, right? So today, the time to compromise is oftentimes in a few minutes. I think about 82% of the compromises happen in a few minutes. And the time to exfiltration actually came down to days. I think it was 68% or so. So that's why what we believe is that you really have to look at this entire kill chain that you see shown here and begin to start asking the question, now how do you, break that chain so that the attacker finds it more difficult? And we'll elaborate on this at a later point in time.
Well, that kind of leads into my second question. Sometimes it seems like there is an asymmetry between our roles as defenders and protecting ourselves against the actions of attackers. Here would be my question. Should we feel helpless? They're just going to attack us. It's too bad. Or how do we begin to turn the tables on folks that are, because I think we would all agree here, it's no longer a question of if you're going to get attacked, but when. So how can we turn the tables?
Great question. So if you can go back to the previous slide, Jimmy. When you look at this chain here, the good news about the chain is that it's only as strong as its weakest link, right? So we don't need to feel helpless about it. But actually, there is a lot of tools, as Sean was saying, that exist today, which can be used very effectively in terms of what we call as turning the tables on the attacker. The state of affairs today is such that an attacker needs to find only one hole for them to succeed, whereas the defender needs to be successful 100% of the time. And part of it is because of the fact that we have relied very heavily on perimeter security, thinking that having an effective perimeter kind of shuts off many of the things. I think that's a fallacy, right? It's absolutely important to have a strong perimeter, but we can't just feel secure thinking that just because we have the latest generation of firewall installed and everything else is hunky-dory. So the way I would look at it is that if you actually have a way to gain better visibility into every activity that's going on across the kill chain, then the attacker needs to be successful 100% of the time in all their activities for them to escape detection. And the defender just needs to find one such place where they could be caught, and then it really changes the asymmetric nature of the attacker-defender asymmetry in the favor of the defender.
Thank you. Yes, Jay.
So can I just add a quick comment on this turn the table? We talk about a lot of tools, a lot of gadgets we can purchase. However, security, he said many times while he was the ISO, security is everyone's business. It's not ISO's business. With that mentality, so everyone is responsible to look out, to report suspicious activity. And also all the technology we're talking about, it is not just technology, it's the process, we call it triangle, process, technology, and people. More than likely, people always the weakest link of the all solutions. So we need to emphasize, we need to have awareness, security is everyone's business. With that said, and also I kind of comment on the firewall, the parameter protection. We kind of learned the lesson. We gave a free pass. Once you get in, we don't have anything between. You can go anywhere. So there are some new technology solutions in the market which will track the pattern, will track what's the inside behind the firewall looks like, what is normal, what is abnormal activity. I always kind of talk to our DBA. Don't rely on ISO to give you guidance. As a database manager, you should know what kind of a pattern, what kind of data download should happen. If you see gigantic download, that's a problem. So it is important to have an increase.
What's the difference between the time that someone comes in to you actually detect them? I've read a lot of different reports that say it can be 100+ days till someone.
Yes, that's very dangerous. So
yeah, a little bit.
The earlier is the better, but sometimes it takes time to realize you get breached. But as I said, the people is the most important. We can spend a lot of money on gadget, but if we fail on the people side, then we are vulnerable. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. We'll go.
Who's
Carlos,
jumping
then
on?
Tom.
No,
Carlos?
go ahead, Tom.
You know, I just wanted to, provide some specifics on how long does it take. I track 3 sources, Mandiant, which is now FireEye, and Ponemon, which is an interesting source, and also Verizon. I tend to use a Mandiant number because it tells my story better, but the Mandiant number varies a little bit from year to year, but it was from compromise to detection was 104 days. Which is a very long time. And the other number that comes out of Mandiant that's fascinating is they say 66% of those compromises you don't find yourself. Somebody else finds them. And so the story I like to use to our executives is, how do you feel about waking up in the morning and reading that you've been compromised in the Wall Street Journal?
Carlos.
So I just wanted to comment on being able to detect and understand when you've been compromised and how long it takes. Here's an example of where you see folks in other industries using similar models that could be turned towards cybersecurity. So if you look at what the financial industries are doing, one of the issues they've had is people doing fraudulent trades or in some cases trades, or they have certain triggers that'll trigger bad reactions in the marketplace. So they've started to use learning technologies to understand, hey, what's an anomaly? What is something that doesn't fit the regular pattern? So as Jay was saying, being humanly able to identify or to track everything that's going on and understand when somebody's doing a large anomalous data download or when you're seeing access to systems that somebody shouldn't have, that's really a difficult thing to do, especially in a large organization just with manpower. But if you apply learning technologies to it, you might be able to spot that instantly and say, hey, something's wrong here, and at least raise an alert, if not, respond automatically too. So there's solutions out there. There's ways of applying the technologies that are already out in the industry, maybe just in a different model or not necessarily being focused on cybersecurity, but there's things that we can do to leverage those sorts of innovations to find better ways of protecting ourselves.
Thank you, Carlos. Keith, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something because you talked about credentials, and one of the things, we talk about trying to get ahead of the game. And I don't know if you guys saw the report on the LA County's audit a year ago or so. And one of the big things we can do, a couple of big things, and one is going back and really putting good procedures and policies in place for least privilege, and then having a good program that goes back and looks at, and one of the big things they was highlighted in that report was they had some credentials that had been still in the system and active for folks that had advanced privileges for a very long time. So, I mean, a lot of these breaches, they're getting their own credentials, and as was pointed out, most of the time, you're finding out from a third party what's going on, but, in a couple of cases, and I think it was was it the Anthem one where the guy actually understood the guy that's credentials were actually being used to breach. He's the one that found out about it. So I think credentials and good policies and procedures as it goes around that and adhering to the least privilege and then going back and making sure that we don't have credentials that are active from folks that haven't been around for a while is huge, and trying to prevent that.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate all those insights. I also encourage all of you out in the audience, a couple months ago, we hosted a national webinar called Hackers and the Human Factor, and we had the CISO from Missouri, Michael Rowley, on, and he talked about what happened with Ferguson. And, like you all are saying, you can ultimately find yourself in a powder cake situation with someone telling you about it, and that's not a good place to be. I'm going to shift gears now. I'm going to head over to Mike Schilling, and again, thank you for coming down from Chico today. This is a very interesting question to me because I kind of lost track of Section 508. Years ago, I was working for a consulting firm, and they said, "You're our new 508 expert." And I go, "Well, what's 508? And I had to go and read about it. And of course, it's the American Disabilities Act of '73 that made sure that IT information was accessible. And, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Mike, when you all are purchasing software, how do you incorporate people's requirements, security like Section 508?
Thank you. And we've touched a little bit on this today, but let me put this in perspective. Chico is about 2,000 employees. Half of those are faculty, so there's a lot of freedom in that area.
Right.
So we all need to have a good understanding and appreciation of working within a federated environment. There are more than 250 departments on the campus, many small, many large, that all know exactly what they need.
Well, and I mean, that's the point of a university, to collaborate, share,
Right.
ponder,
Right.
think, exchange.
Right.
So, yeah.
So while we all have shared responsibility for meeting the client's needs, and I have emphasized that, as was said here, that everyone on the staff has responsibility for security, we've nonetheless put in place a process to try and address that. So we are responsible, and certainly not the volume that some of you are, but we are responsible for PII data, PCI data, HIPAA data, FERPA data, which is student data. We have a relatively small police department, but still Department of Justice data and interfaces to the state, and very important vendor management. So the program that we put in place touches on the client's requirements, certainly trying to expedite them, but not too quickly, making sure we do what's required. An in-depth security review. We look at integration, whether it's on premise or in the cloud, and the implications there, and a detailed compliance review.
Talk a little bit about the kind of, what do you do to analyze a threat when it comes in?
Sure.
I mean, like I said, you're in this large collaborative environment. Most students, I have a college student, you know, he has several devices with him at all the time. And how do you begin to analyze when a threat comes into Chico State?
More broadly, outside of
Yeah.
compliance.
Yeah.
Well, let me just touch on the compliance
Sure,
piece, and
please,
then
go
it
ahead.
kind of flows in. So for those applications or new systems where there is a certification, we do a detailed review, but probably not at as much of a level if there is no 508 certification. So where there's no certification, we do a deep dive. We look into all the functionality and all of the screens. And one of three outcomes generally happens: that it gets approved and we work with the vendor to mitigate the problem. We establish compensating controls, ways to work around what we find, or it's rejected. The important part here is that we've incorporated that into all of the renewals for software and licensing and hardware purchases going forward. So while we make an initial attempt at something new, what we're trying to do over a 3-year period is go back and look at everything that was purchased historically.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
And that leads to discovery.
Right.
So in terms of discovery, we rely heavily on many of the reporting functions out of the firewall technology, IPS, IDS, and such as that. Generally, the campus is broken into the faculty and staff segment,
Right.
and then the student segment. And for the faculty and staff side, we support approximately about 800 applications, which is made up both server-based applications and web applications. So the challenge, to answer the second part of your question, is responding on a 24-hour-a-day basis with a staff of one shift. And that's really where
It's pretty easy, right?
That's, well, what we've tried to do is to break that down between the exempt staff and the covered staff, and make it everyone's responsibility to respond. So whether it's a weekend, a holiday weekend, we're certainly not immediately responding, but we're trying to respond within an hour or so anytime we find a potential threat.
Thank you for that. I'm going to shift over, Steve. Yeah, we had mentioned earlier for kind of our last discussion, you know, it's no longer a question of if, but when. And we just talked recently here about, from time to detect to you're aware that something's going on. What do we do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think someone had pre-submitted that one, right, as a little bit earlier. And
we got a lot of questions. Tell me what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we think, even through the course of this panel discussion, as we sit back and look at the cybersecurity problem or read about it or look at things like the kill chain, sometimes it seems like the problem is insurmountable, right? So when we take a look at cybersecurity, sometimes it's worth breaking a big problem, down into manageable chunks. So one of the approaches that, Cisco takes towards cybersecurity is we break things down into looking across what we call the full attack continuum, right? We all know that we're going to be attacked at some point. We all know that we have to reduce that time to detection, and we have to be able to recover, right? Respond and recover afterwards. So we think about it in terms of what needs to be done before an attack, what needs to be done during an attack, and what needs to be done after, right? So before an attack, I think, Jason made the point of you can't really protect what you can't see. And obviously the theme, of our session here today is all about visibility, right? So we have to do a better job of being able to identify what we actually have. Like, how many of us out there have a good handle on what is actually connecting to our networks? How many of us know what applications are running, right? How many of us know what devices are actively, connecting to the network and so forth? So imagine if we had automated capabilities to be able to profile devices and help us figure out what's actually on our network, right? Is Windows 2003, still out there? And if so, what kind of compensating controls can we put around it? So before an attack occurs, part of that is that visibility into knowing what we actually have, but also part of it is obviously putting the right access controls in place. Right, so, we talked a little bit about firewalls, just a second ago, but can you imagine, too, if the network itself could help act as an enforcer of policy? So to protect from the point of sale network not actually communicating to the HVAC, right? Imagine if you just had a simple policy where the network wouldn't allow that kind of thing, right? That's the kind of protective types of controls that need to be done before an attack occurs. Of course, we've also heard today about reducing that time to detection, right? So I think Carlos made the point about the capabilities that can actually automatically sense, right? I don't think we can ask a database administrator who's trying to keep a database up and running to also know about where that data needs to go and to watch network traffic patterns and things. So imagine if we had the capabilities to sense when all of a sudden the database is sending a pile of traffic through FTP to a direction it's never done before. And can you imagine, too, if that capability to discover that sent the signal back to the policy to stop those kinds of things from occurring, right? And of course, once we reduce that time to detection, we also have to have those capabilities after, right, the attack occurs to be able to scope, contain, and remediate, right? First of all, we want to be able to stop, the bleeding and contain, but we also need to have those response and recovery capabilities to bring things back together and, get things back to normal. So when we think about cybersecurity, how we act on that is covering that full attack continuum of the capabilities, people, process, and technology controls across that whole attack continuum. And what's fantastic, too, is it aligns with all these best practices. So for those of you who are already familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework, the framework core puts cybersecurity into 5 buckets: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? Everything in cybersecurity fits in those 5 things, and it really aligns beautifully with the simple way of approaching, security in terms of what needs to be done before, during, and after an attack.
Now, do you want to comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one quick comment. 79% of all organizations that we reviewed have no IR plan. So to your point, the instant response and then remediation is, first step is almost 80% of organizations don't have an IR plan.
Or how many have an IR plan that's just cyber insurance?
Well,
that's their plan.
Leads me to my next question for you, though. When you have unlimited resources, unlimited staff, you can deal with this problem. It seems very daunting, but what do you do when you have a limited budget, you have a scaled down staff? How do you begin to protect yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to think about and to know what needs to be done. I think there's no shortage of best practices out there, right? All of us are probably familiar with NIST Special Publication 853. Most of us are probably familiar with, the SANS Top 20 critical security controls, right? There's no shortage of that, but I think part of the challenge here is how do we approach this from a risk management, approach, right? How do we figure out what's actually putting our agency at risk and then focusing on what the highest risks are, right? We want to bring that risk down to an acceptable level, and being thrown, 20 things or 460 pages from this special publication 853 isn't necessarily the way to go. So one of the things to think about, right, and we've been advocating here at Cisco, is taking a good look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? NIST spent a good year working with both public and private sector, looking at the security controls across, right, all those 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So things like incident response planning, for example, is one of those, critical types of, controls that need to be put in place. But the beauty of the framework is really helping organizations laser focus on what's putting the organization at risk, right? And picking from those controls, right, the things that are going to reduce risk to that manageable level. So cybersecurity risk management is a huge problem for any organization. We've seen, I mean, we at Cisco, we approach cybersecurity in this way as well, right? We have a lot of, customer information. We have a lot of intellectual property and so forth to protect. So clearly, we don't want to be in the news either. So this is the type of approach that we take, is looking at those risks, right, and using something like the cybersecurity framework in the context of what we're already doing to do security in order to figure out where to prioritize.
Thank you, Steve. Ananda, you want to do a comment?
Yeah, just to add to what Steve mentioned, great points there, Steve. We had a customer, I think it was VeriSign, who spoke at an event a couple of weeks back, and they shared a dramatic example of how they were able to cut down the time to deployment of their security appliances from 9 months to almost like less than 2 weeks. Now that's almost like it's like either it must be really bad before, or they must have, or they must have done something dramatic. I think the answer is both, because one of the unsaid things, I think somebody mentioned in the panel, that processes are a big part of what slows down how things get implemented, right? And we should never underestimate the impact of those processes, because perhaps there is different mandates that different teams in an organization have, which may not necessarily be collaborating or moving in the same direction. A classic one that we often see is that many times the security teams want to place their appliances in line so that immediate remediation can be taken. However, the infrastructure teams not necessarily completely agree with that aspect. And so finding a maintenance window in order to patch a specific security software or add a new appliance becomes very long. And during that time, you're actually having exposure for your organization. So one of the things that we at Gigamon have often said is, have always said, not often, is that when you use visibility in the right way, it'll help complement the fantastic appliances and security offerings that companies like Cisco and many others have, so that it'll become much more faster to put these in process. Because let's face it, we all have a severe shortage of security manpower here.
Thank you, Ananda. Carlos.
I just wanted to add on a little bit to what Steve was saying. So your question to him was, okay, what do you do if you're faced with a shortage of resources or insufficient budget? So this is especially for the public sector folks here. One of the key things you have to do is you have to ask for those resources. You have to go to your decision makers, your policy makers, your budget people, and make it clear to them, one, what the impact is of not having those, and really make them partners in that decision of not either providing you the resources, or if they're not going to provide you the resources, you have somebody in the boat with you when something bad happens. So it really requires the ability to share with them and to help them to understand why you need the resources, what are the exposures that you face, and what are the consequences when something does happen. Because I guarantee you one thing, at least in the public sector, when an incident does happen and when you get a severe breach, then the resources are made available. At that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
But
Sure, Steve.
Yeah, just one final point to that. And Carlos, you make a fantastic point about asking for the resources. And another important point about the cybersecurity framework, just to kind of close the loop on that, is that it provides a common language to discuss cybersecurity. Right? Cybersecurity has become level conversations from all the way from the security analyst to the chief information security officer. So imagine too if we had a common language to discuss it and to go and ask for funding decisions. We at Cisco actually work with a number of our customers to put their requirements in the context of the framework so that they're completely understood all throughout the organization and they understand the importance. It's been an effective way to get the funding that's necessary, right? Just to be able to talk in all those kinds of languages. That way they're not going in saying, hey, we have this NetFlow project that we need to do, and you start losing everybody. So using that, the framework as a way to discuss and think about cybersecurity is a great way, to accomplish what Carlos just said.
I said we have a couple more questions. So Tom and Ashes, if you may get that. And then, one point I do want to table, and we'll open it up with the audience time, is we've gotten a lot of questions that came in from you all, is just because I meet my NIST cybersecurity standards doesn't mean I'm secure. I want to table that for the audience time, but Tom, you wanted to say something, then Ashish, and then
Yeah, this is very, very short, and it's kind of an add-on to Carlos's comment. One technique and advice that I would offer to people that has worked for me is you have to ask. I mean, there's no question about it. You have to speak business language when you ask, but here's the key. Is you have to acknowledge that your organization only has fixed amount of resources. They have to spend it in the best interest of the organization. And if they choose not to spend it on cybersecurity, I understand that. Just make them accountable for that decision. Because what I've discovered is fewer and fewer people who control the purse strings want to say, no, we're not going to spend that money on cybersecurity, because the downside risk to them is very, very high.
Ashish, go ahead.
Yes, talking of resources, I think, we definitely need to ask. But I think as an information security officer, I'm one information security officer with many hats at the agency. So prioritization comes in. So if you look at the NIST controls, everything is important. All the 20 are important, but which one is the most important to the business? And I think each year or each 2 months, 3 months, you take a stab at that and then move on to the next control. And I think that's an approach that I've been using.
Excellent. I want to move over now to Rebecca Scar. Rebecca, you at the beginning commented just the vast size of your organization, and I didn't realize, I thought I knew a lot about DGS, but I didn't realize how widespread it is. But you have been known to say a few key phrases in a lot of your staff meetings to your team, but how do you get the message out about security?
So wherever I can, I say, I just come right out and say, we are always under attack. And I'm not saying that to make it fearful for people, but really to bring awareness to how important information security is. And to really think before you click. And if you have any questions as to whether or not something may be safe, call us. We want to be right there to help you figure out if that's the right thing to do for the business. We're always open to talking with people about it. We don't treat, when they come to us with questions, we don't treat them like they're criminals or they're malicious. We treat them with utmost respect. We actually have 10% of our IT staff dedicated to information security, either in the information security office or in security operations. And I'm fortunate here to have a couple of our security operations staff with us. Our infrastructure, chief of infrastructure, she actually has a CISSP, so she understands how important security is. So we don't have the conflicts that I hear within so many other organizations as to how to penetrate the network with the right security protocols. It's just something we do. And I'm really proud of our security operations staff and how they've stood up SIM, our event monitoring, our new firewalls. Security is a part of our life within DGS. It's a tier 1 initiative within IT. We talk about it all the time. We're constantly vigilant about it. We're essentially thinking of information security from the very beginning of any initiative, be it like an infrastructure-based project or an applications-based. So, anyway.
I like to think before you click, words to live by. My next question for you, and this is one that you all, the audience, asked us several times from registration, is the roles between a chief information officer and a chief information security officer. Talk to me a little bit. You're a CIO that has CISOs and folks working on doing security. Should security be under the CIO? Should the CIO just manage it? Should they be separate? What's your opinion on that?
I've been fortunate to have two great ISOs, the one that we currently have and the one that recently retired. Both of them definitely have a strong security background, strong infrastructure background, and very diligent about wanting to protect the department, but also recognizing that we are there to provide services. And not only do we want to provide the services that the business needs today, but we want to be there ready to provide the services that they need tomorrow. So they've been really good about partnering to make sure that we can do that in a safe and secure manner. We both agree that we want to leverage our resources to the utmost, meaning we would rather protect the environment than respond to an issue. So we're constantly reviewing and assessing together and looking at ways to make the organization secure. Yeah, it was mentioned before, the modernization and the hardening. So many of us inherited numerous legacy applications that reside throughout the state. And so it's pretty far-reaching how much work it is to do that modernization and hardening. And how far do you take it? Because you could invest every dollar you have in security aspects. And so where is that point? And fortunately, I've worked with ISOs that get it. And a difficult thing, though, sometimes for ISOs, like I said, not my experience at DGS is, but I have witnessed that they speak in terms that the business doesn't get, or so esoteric that they can't make sense of it. So when the ISO can be a partner with the business and speak in business terms as to how this vulnerability could lead to this in your business, and speak specifically, that's when they're more effective. I kind of keep coming back to the cyber hygiene stuff and those aspects, and it's all been mentioned here before, but we're both of like mind in that we want to know what our inventory is, what are all those devices out there, map them, know how they're interconnected, and have them configured correctly, and have that information all readily available. That may sound so basic, but having that when, again, so many of us walked into organizations that had all this legacy, these applications out there and equipment, it's amazing what we continue to find. So, but that's what we're constantly striving for. And then the controls, putting in the RBAC and then constantly reviewing and auditing, did the people that left, are there access? Are they not there? Et cetera. It's a constant work effort. And then patching. I almost find that there could be more acceptance for a 0-day vulnerability than there is for some of those the patches for operating systems and SQL Server, et cetera, Linux, whatever, that we need to apply. No one wants an application to break. No one wants an environment to break. No one wants the network to be shut down because of a new firewall patch. So there's always a lot of fear that goes into that. But it's such a necessary thing, the simplistic patching stuff. So anyway, I think the ISO and the CIO are partners, and security can't be ignored. I think the Target incident actually did a lot for a lot of us in that it raised the awareness of how important cybersecurity was, to a great cost to Target, but you're never done, and we're in it together.
Excellent answer. I'm going to shift gears over to high-speed rail for a moment. Keith, first off, thank you. You had a 33-year career with the National Guard. Thank you for our service to our country. I have a deep respect for that. You spent some time in Orange County, and now you've come back with high-speed rail. Can you share with our audience what's going on? I've done the trains before, so they're a little slow right now. So when I hear high-speed rail, I'm getting excited. So share with us a little bit what's going on and what brought you back to do the project.
Well, it's first of all, it's an exciting project to be part of something coming from the ground up, and not to disappoint anybody, I'm not involved in the day-to-day where the stations are going to be and that kind of stuff. My staff, our primary focus is providing the shared IT environment for our rail delivery partners for both emails, shared resources and IT, file service, and those kinds of things. And the bigger piece is the oversight for rail delivery. The rail delivery partners are putting in systems like contract management, financial management systems, and they have to tie into fiscal and all of those good things. So we're looking at it, and we're approaching it from the oversight piece. And by doing that, or by saying that, I mean we are looking at ensuring that best business practices are being utilized, the state project management framework kind of things for project management, and making sure security's built in from the ground up. Having come from a security side, sometimes they get a little frustrated with me because I'm already talking about security when they're building it. But it's important, and because high-speed rail is such a high-profile project, we need to make sure that we're not adding to the issues. And Rebecca brings up a good point about a lot of security folks have a tendency to be skies falling, or have been anyway, or too techie, or come in and just don't know how to explain the situation. And realistically, and I talked to Carlos about this when I was the state ISO, it's about balancing and managing risk. And there's no such thing as zero risk. And, as Rebecca also pointed out, you can also spend all your money on security and you're never going to get 100% security. So it's all about balancing that. So what I'm trying to do in high-speed rail is ensure that we build the security in from ground up. And a lot of the programs, as we're putting them in place, which I always like to try to say, so I like to practice what I preach, and that is testing, doing security testing on any of these systems before we put them online that go live. We're revamping our security awareness, another big thing that I was glad to hear folks understand and are talking about, putting in a much more robust security awareness program, and then putting in tools for vulnerability management and those kinds of things so that we can have a better preemptive versus a reactive take and approach to security. So those are the things that we're trying to do, and but also partnering with the state, with OTEC, on the systems that we do have for the state, and making sure that from our side there that we're managing the security things. Knock on wood, I wasn't one of the few chosen, not being the first 35 to get into the audits, but I know that's coming very soon. And our approach is to always be ready. So that's what we're focusing on.
Good advice. Folks, I also just want to comment right about 10:30. I have a couple questions for Stephanie, Dr. Gilbert, and Tom, and then I'm going to open it up to you, the audience, and we'll make sure we get time for all of your questions. So, Stephanie, I'm going to switch gears, and I want to talk to you. Former security chief of Department of Justice, you're now consulting on the side of it. So you kind of have an interesting view of being on both sides of the fence now. My question for you is, as companies and state agencies are moving toward IP-based services, security is becoming a bigger concern on the WAN. Do you think CIOs and CSOs are collaborating on these discussions? And what are you seeing more of in the industry as telecom and security partner? How are companies addressing all this?
Well, traditionally, IP-based services and the procurement of that has been within the domain of the CIOs and the technology staff, primarily leaving the CISOs out, and therefore a lot of the security requirements or desires out of those types of procurements. And that was because the belief was that telecom belonged in the IT domain in that shop, and it did not cross over into security. However, with more and more services going out over IP, I'm not just talking about voice over IP, but a lot of other services, we're seeing within the private sector that CIOs and CISOs are now beginning to collaborate. They're understanding, as we've talked here today, that security is twofold. It's within both sides of the house. It's not just within one domain. So they're realizing that their board of directors, their owners, their shareholders are expecting security to be built in from the get-go. So we're seeing that collaboration happening with any of the IP procurements.
Talk to me a moment. When you were here in the Department of Justice, we're seeing a lot of momentum in the marketplace where a lot of security companies are changing some things. They're reinventing themselves to deal with the demand that's impacting us. And a lot of people are going to more of a managed service. When you were here in the state, how did you view managed service in terms of meeting your security challenges?
Yeah, for those of us that have been in security for a while, we lived through the, security as a service, the SaaS days. We all had high hopes in the beginning of some of that. And it basically, turned out to be not everything at that time that we desired. Mm-hmm. And security as a service got a bad rap. It was heavily reliant on software to look for viruses, detect a little bit of malware. You still got the call in the middle of the night if something was breached or an alert happened, and you had to wake up staff to go investigate. They had to hunt it down. And so it was pretty cumbersome at that time. What we're seeing now in the newer managed services is that they have the capabilities to find threats. They're not just using known vulnerabilities. They're also using trained intelligence analysts, security analysts. As Sean mentioned, it's very important to have that analyst with the intuition. And so we're seeing that happen, which is bringing a new dimension to the managed service. They're reducing a lot of the time to detect from the 104 days that Tom mentioned. I've heard it upwards to 265 days in
I've
some
heard it higher
reports.
also. Yeah.
But they're reducing that to minutes because those security analysts are being able to detect what's normal for your network and what's not. So what may look like normal traffic to just software, the analyst will know that you don't regularly do business and phone at home to China. So maybe we better pick up the phone and call you and find out what's going on. So they're helping to establish what's normal and what's abnormal, that human intelligence factor. Some of them, going to Rebecca's point, are providing a real-time picture of what your network looks like. Right. They're able to detect what you have on the network, what software is running and where, as we talked about, so you can go in and remediate that or partition it off. And then, again, reiterating Sean's point that the tools are great, but that human intelligence is good. And as a my state career, when it was me and my staff of me, I could have used a managed service that would have helped me all the way to when I had a very highly trained, skilled staff with white hat hackers on board, and I could have used it there because reality is we don't have eyes on our network 24/7. And the new managed services that are out there, there's several varieties of them. Those people are looking at your networks 24/7. So when you get the call, you know that it's real. So again, something that I'm finding in my new career that I could have used in my old career to help.
Well said, well said. Larry, I'd like to ask you, how can public institutions, how can we work smarter? How can we think more strategically? I think we've made it clear to the audience. You have a security threat. It's coming. It's going to be part of our lives. Think before we click. Do all these things. But in terms of as a public institution, how do we begin to work smarter?
Well, in order to think strategically, you've got to have a solid governance process, and that governance process has to really be embedded in your executive decision making. Although we grumbled about this at the time, that the information security policies came down from on high in the California State University system, our information security in the CSU is delegated to the presidents of campuses. And that president is highly accountable to our board of trustees and our chancellor, and they take that accountability very seriously. In addition, the president can only delegate down one level, and typically that's one level down to a vice president or CIO on a campus. And information security risk cannot be delegated lower than that within this institution. Not that people don't take it upon themselves to take on information security risk, but they do it at their own peril because they're highly accountable all the way up to our Board of Trustees. When we have an incident on our campus, it must be immediately reported to me. I must immediately report to the president, and then it's immediately reported to the chancellor and to the Board of Trustees. So people tend to take that pretty seriously. The other thing that governance process and placement allows us to do is when we ask for resources, we're asking for resources at the highest strategic level of the institution. You know, just last month, I put in my budget request for next year, and even in some relatively tough budget times that we're facing because of salary increases, there was no question but that I was going to get the increase that we needed for information security because that had already been discussed with the president, had already been discussed with the cabinet, and it's just going to happen because the decision making occurs and resource management occurs at that strategic level of the campus. I'm also going to echo what many of my fellow panelists said, that you have to make information security everybody's business across campus. And you have to do that in a way that's not just enforcement. You have to do this because you have to do it, because regulation and law says you have to do it. You make it people's responsibility to understand that we're stewards of information for the citizens of California. It's really amazing. When you just look at Sacramento State alone, Sacramento State has 235,000 alumni. We graduated 5,000 alumni last weekend alone. 1 in 20 citizens of the Sacramento region is a Sac State alum. Huge numbers of people in state government. And throughout police agencies and health agencies and education agencies and so forth, throughout the state. So we really talk about personal information. We have personal information that's really the keys to the kingdom. And when you look at this panel up here, I mean, this group is almost responsible for the information related to every citizen in the state of California. So you better be taking that seriously at the strategic and executive level. I'm also going to heartily agree with Carlos, and not just because he's a Sac State alum himself. When Carlos said that as important as incident response is, if all you're doing is being reactive and responding to incidents, in many ways you've already lost the battle. We think that you have to be very proactive. You have to be very, very aggressive. We do quarterly risk assessments that do a deep dive on our most vulnerable areas across the campus. And a couple of years ago, we were doing that, but we weren't following up aggressively on the follow-up. So we were leaving vulnerabilities out there. Well, now, as part of our governance process, we require that people respond within a very short set of time, and we enforce that through executive policy across our campus.
One of the questions I have for you is, attackers, cyber terrorists all have certain behavioral characteristics. What are some of the changes that you're seeing from the behavior of attackers, and how have you all adapted to that?
Well, before we started the forum, I was chatting with Jason next to me about the changes in behavior that his organization has seen internationally, and we were talking about the remarkable persistence and depth of the attacks that we're experiencing now. I'll give you an example on our campus where probably an international crime organization was trying to drill down into our cashier's office. They wanted to get to the half a dozen people that have the ability to write checks for our $250 million budget on an annual basis. So for many, many months, they sat on our network and they compromised one account, and they kept sitting on the network until they finally got to one person's email in the cashiering office. They sat on that account. They monitored that person's behavior. They monitored their patterns. They started sending emails to people as if they were coming from the person on that account. And the end of the story is they actually compromised the account of one of the 6 people who could write checks for the university. And there were 2 things that saved this. We had just introduced FireEye actually, as a tool that we were using. So we began to see this traffic that didn't look right from the cashiering office. But the other thing that saved this is that just a month before the attackers could have acted, we had moved to a new bank which required two-factor authentication. And honestly, that was the only thing that kept our accounts from being at least started to be cleaned out. So it's the aggressiveness and persistence of the attacks that's really a remarkable thing these days.
Appreciate that. Tom, one more couple questions for Tom, then we'll open it up to you, all the audience. I know it's hard when everyone asks you the magic 8-ball question, but can you shake it a little bit and tell us, what do we see coming down the next 2 years? What do you think is going to happen in terms of security?
Well, many of these things have already been said. I think things out in the future that I would recommend people at least keep on their radar is, we just talked about it, the attack surface has changed. Over the years, we've invested a lot of money on the perimeter, protecting itself from the internet, which, that investment is still a valid investment. But the attack surface right now is the workstation base. And it is so simple and inexpensive to compromise a workstation via phishing email that, there's virtually no defense for that. So acknowledging that, and what, I'm recommending people do is you consider your workstation implementation a high-risk part of your infrastructure, and you partition it and compartmentalize it in your network, just like you partition yourself from the internet. So it is a threat. I mean, it's not quite as high as the internet, but it's very, very high. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is impersonation and account takeover. That's starting. The old knowledge-based authentication questions are largely compromised in the larger universe. The account takeover is the one thing that the attackers seem to do in the pen tests that I've had done. Is I watch the pen testers, and we've mentioned that we have to be right all of the time. They only have to be right one of the times. Well, let's just be honest. They will be right. They will get in. And the first thing that they want to do is they want to compromise an account. And as soon as they compromise the account, which is trivial for them, then this is our opportunity, is we know a lot about our environments and they don't. So it takes them hours and perhaps days of looking through our environments, trying to find what they're looking for. That's when you can invest in detection. So, I would propose that as the threat landscape is evolving, that we start investing more and more in detection. And then, the other thing, and this is relative more to protective and response than it is threats, but acknowledging those things is you want to start limiting and reducing the time to the extent you can between the detection and the response. Right now, 100 days is way too long. You want to get it down to minutes and hours if you can. And there are approaches to do that, but, those are kind of things out in the future that I would, suggest people think about.
So, last question for you, and kind of before we open it up to all the audience. My hypothesis is that you're going to get hacked. We all, have kind of come to that consensus today that there's an imminent threat to us. So, what do we do? I mean, we've had some opinions here, but have the last word on what do we do to protect ourselves?
Well, it's always so much fun to have the last word. The things, at least that that I'm interested in right now, is keep doing what you're doing. I mean, you've got to do that. You really want to invest in education because it turns out that that's both your largest protective and detective, investment you can make. It's systemic. It's a cultural thing in your organization. One of the things that I've done that may be of use is presume that you are going to be attacked, and if you acknowledge that, then start preparing for your response. And one of the things I recommend to people is go in and identify a technical partner. We've identified Mandiant as our technical partner, and that's basically because if we were compromised, we'd call them anyway. So we have a pre-existing contractual relationship with them. We've identified a technical partner, which is a public relations firm, a legal firm, and we have, identity, protection services, all pre-identified. So if something does happen, you can react quickly. So I think that's a really, really significant defense. And the other thing I'll just leave you with this is there's an idea that I have called a compromise assessment. And it's almost like your annual physical at the doctor's office. Is you don't think you're sick, but you want to go in and make sure. So they do a bunch of blood tests. Well, what I propose that we do is on a regular basis is, and I did this with Mandy, and I said, you know, we have no reason to think we've been compromised, but let's pretend we were. Come in and find the compromise. Because if you can't find it, then I have a point in time forward that I have kind of a health baseline. And if I do that on a reoccurring basis, then I have some reasonable assurance that, you know, I'm still okay. So those are just some things I'd like to leave you with.
Thank you, Tom. We're now going to go to the portion of the program, and I'm aware we're about 10 of 11. I know Keith has to leave at 11 for a budget meeting, but I may ask our panelists if you could stay a few extra moments. We had over 30 questions come in on registration. I'm going to open it up now to you, the audience, for some questions that you may have for our panelists. Testing. So right now, it's the time of our program. If you have a question for our speakers, I have about another 30 questions that came in through registration last, but would someone, we have a gentleman over here, let me go ahead and bring him in. And also, if you could, it'd be helpful for our panel, kindly tell us who you are, your organization, sort of the perspective you're coming at with your question.
Joe Selner, Sacramento County. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll just keep it to one for you. One of the problems I'm having right now, and we have cybersecurity insurance and all that, and you alluded to that earlier, that being your only incident response, formal incident response outside of, you know, what we do day to day for issues. But how do you write a bulletproof incident response plan? I mean, I've used NIST 861 and some other things to help guide me, but you know, and we've looked at our attack vectors and kind of shot them through the IR plan, but I'm still not convinced that it's, you know, it's going to hold up as well as I'd like in a situation.
I'll do an initial response to that. So do you carry out what we call, you know, fire drills? You're actually testing your incident response plan on a regular basis. You know, that's something that really we recommend, is that once you develop your plan, you test your plan just like a fire drill.
And yeah, I was just going to point out too, is, you know, have it looked at by the people who respond all the time, right? So, you know, we at Cisco, we also do things like incident response planning and so forth, but we have the people that fly in and fix things, right? So to have people like that come and take a good look at that incident response plan is a good chance that they'll be a better, you know, in position, you know, to help, you know, figure out where the gaps are.
One other thing I would add, and it goes along with what Steve was saying, but have somebody that's actually been hacked, that's been through it, review it, especially in the public sector. Find another agency that has been through it and had to respond, where they had to issue notices or whatever they had to do, and have them take a look at it and say, okay, what's missing here? What did you guys run into that we didn't anticipate?
I just want to add that just like everything else in security, there's no 100% or perfect solution. So, you know, I like to say have an incident response playbook. But the key, as it was pointed out, is to practice them and have drills so that folks know how to respond. And you can always adapt them as something new comes up. But, you know, it's something that you got to always look at and go back and be willing to change and adapt.
And just briefly, I believe as a state agency, you have the opportunity to have the Air Force Army portion of the analytic cyber group come in, and we did that last year, and it was very valuable.
Yeah, we've had them do some other work for us in local government, and it's, you know, we're kind of working through those results now. It's not specific to that, but I'm aware that they will help tabletop our IR response. So, yeah, we'll see what comes out of that. Thank you.
And you know, this is really short, but one thing, when we're running our tabletops for our incident response, I saw immediately that the business owners of whatever business function was being affected or functions, they actually were the key players. So don't underestimate their role.
You know, we have another question coming up, but one of the questions that came in from registration, and I thought that was a brilliant question. Matter of fact, Ananda, I may ask you to take a crack at this at first, but there's a Gartner report that came out some time back and referred to malware using SSL to remain under the radar of network security solution. How real is that?
Yeah, so this is very real. The specific Gartner report that you mentioned quoted that they estimated, according to those analysts, that by 2017, which is not too far off, almost 50% of malware attacks would be using SSL, right? Which is up from about 5% in, I think, 2013 or so. Now, the reason why this is the case is because when you think about SSL, once that session gets, once SSL gets used, you pretty much get a free pass all the way to the application server or the server where it terminates. So not unsurprisingly, that becomes a pretty attractive one for hackers to use. The point here is that even in the recent Verizon DBIR report, web application servers were often used as the point of attack for any servers that are hosted by an organization. You combine that with this, what this is raising is the aspect that typically, even though many products and solutions are capable of doing SSL, because of the performance tax, it's generally turned off. And I would caution against doing that as a best practice, but think about ways in terms of perhaps having a standalone SSL solution which could avoid repeated break inspect, but rather decrypt once legally, of course, and then use it for any kind of analysis that is required for better security.
My name is Justin Masters. I'm over in the ISO's office at EDD. Are we at an inflection point with regards to compliance or security frameworks or risk frameworks? We've moved from ISO 27001 to NIST 853. Now we're looking at the Attorney General's report that points out that if you're not abiding by the CIS Top 20, then you're going to be basically negligent. There was some comments made about the cybersecurity framework, which introduced more of the business into that security analysis. We're baking in, we're trying to bake in security so that we meet the NIST requirements, but that costs a lot of money. And I heard a lot of comments up there about more of the reactive and the detection and the protection, and that's more along the cybersecurity framework. And so are we at an inflection point? Do we see the state changing its mandate away from maybe the broad NIST to more of the narrower NIST with CIS Top 20 to the cybersecurity framework?
There it goes. It was a little off to the side here. So the first thing I just wanted to point out about the cyber framework, and you might already be familiar with this, is there's a section in the framework core called the informative resources. Right, so the informative resources are the links back to those best practices. And so it already links back to the top 20, it links to 853, it links to ISO 27000, even links to COVID 5 and others. Right, so the point about the framework is to say, like, look, let's take a step back from all these frameworks. Right, NIST 800-53 is a 460-page document. Right, it has a whole pile of stuff to throw at us. The point is to try to drive that risk-based approach to develop that roadmap. In terms of the cybersecurity framework, it's called a target profile, right? And it's a time-based way to say, hey, look, let's accomplish these three things because they're putting our organization at risk. And what's fantastic about that is those three things, as listed out by the framework, will then in turn point back to those existing best practices. So most organizations do that, right? They use the cybersecurity framework in conjunction with the deeper best practices to give that additional level of guidance. Right, so you can use the framework with ISO 27002, for example. They're designed, obviously to work together. And then, just to a point about, I guess to say at an inflection point, I think NIST sort of recognized the need, right, to put something out there that's a simple way to take and approach cybersecurity, to talk about it, right, and to get us all thinking about it. So to be able to put something out in the simple context of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and to take a look at it as a comprehensive way of figuring out where the risks are, right, to drive that roadmap. I think it's a fantastic approach. So,
thank you, Steve. Anyone else on the panel care to comment that before we go to our next question? We have this gentleman over here.
Hi, my name is my name is Wayne Fisher, and I'm with the University of California, Davis. And I've had the privilege of owning a company and operating with some of you folks up there. and pleased to see some of the security products you purchased. And also, I'm a disabled veteran, so I've served in the military, and I've seen that perspective. And currently, I'm working as a security analyst for UC Davis and help to implement a security operations center in a formal capacity. And I've also worked for the federal government in the USDA, and one of the things I've noticed across all of these industries is that some of the points you touched on were that people are one of the most important and also the weakest links in the security chain. What kind of investments are each of you doing? Is there any state-level mandate to require awareness training on an annual basis, much like the federal government has? And what kind of threats do you think are going to be coming down the line, further targeting those people along the spear phishing line of attack or vector of attack? And what are you doing to mitigate those as vendors and as agency heads?
I can comment quickly on that. State law in California requires that all employees receive regular training on information security. In the CSU, we have a process where we have online information security training that all of our employees are required to go through. The frequency varies from campus to campus, but typically no more than 2 years, and that's what we do.
And I was just going to add, is looking out, I think the social engineering threats, and it's kind of related or a superset of the phishing threats. I think you're going to see more and more of that. I would propose specialized training just for social engineering threats.
And then just one quick point. We at Cisco internally, we get those emails sent to us from the security group. They send an email that says, hey, here's a printout from the printer on the second floor. Open the attachment, right? And it's a test, right, to see who does it. Right, so that's one of the approaches that we do here at Cisco, is to actually check to make sure, right, and make sure people are vigilant. And a second thing is to use really simple solutions, right, to help ward against that. So for example, DNS level security is one way, to help block some of these threats in a scalable way. So obviously there's a lot of technologies that can help protect against when people do click things that they shouldn't.
Thank you. Let me take a quick pause, too. I want to be mindful. We're right at 11 o'clock. I know Keith has to run for a budget meeting, but I'm going to kindly ask the panel if you could stay just maybe a few more minutes. We have a few more questions, and I promise we'll try to wrap up here shortly, but we have a handful more of questions coming in. This gentleman right here, if you'd like to go ahead and ask a question, tell us who you are.
Yeah, sure. Herman Chow with Cisco Systems. And just following on the question around expertise and education, one thing I've noticed at Cisco as well, just trying to hire, even within the private enterprise, the level of expertise required to do, say, deep research of breaches is getting harder and harder. I think, it's probably more lucrative if you're really good at it to be a hacker, right? So just finding that expertise has even been a challenge. And one thing I know I've been trying to do is Cisco's invested actually with the Air Force in Cyber Patriots and trying to educate K through 12, and we've launched various programs to build that expertise. And what I've noticed is, even with my kids, I've got a 6-year-old kid who's an expert on a tablet as a user, but actually finding kids that want to understand it's getting harder and harder, right? So I guess my question is, I hear a lot of talk about the silver tsunami, building SOCs. I know Sean's done a great job with DMV and going out and building a security operations center. Just curious about the make versus buy equation for the state, right? Are you guys open to, how do you find that expertise to really build up the infrastructure to defend our state assets, if you will?
It's an excellent question. Sean, did you want to
So Herman, great question, first of all, and we are in fact facing just that sort of shortage of expertise in this space. As I mentioned, we've set up our SOC, and we've had to go out on 3 separate occasions. To find the right expertise to be able to bring that in-house and leverage it. So it's not an easy task. And so even now we're pondering the question, do we make versus buy? Do we try and groom the in-house personnel or personnel within a certain skill set? For instance, network engineers, they have some of that skill set. Developers have some of that skill set that is transferable into the space. And so we're we're pondering those questions as we speak. Are we going to just bring them in or build them? Because we think this is absolutely critical to our success for the future. One other point, just on the question, I think from Wayne, was the user education problem it's a continuing problem. Through attrition, turnover, the faces are going to change, particularly in a large organization, and that's why the culture is so critical. That culture of ask questions. If I get a strange email from the IT administrator, the first question anyone should be asking is, has the IT administrator ever sent me an email? And why would I trust this now? So it's the culture of security that I think will hopefully answer the question of make versus buy, and well, hopefully that answers the question.
Stephanie.
Your question as to finding the right people for those highly skilled security analysts is one that we've pondered and wondered about throughout my state career. And the reality of what I saw was that you may have a few people that can hack, but they may not have the mindset of a hacker with and then what that takes the next step, that analyzes those breadcrumbs that they've seen in those system logs over the past several days or months of an attack being laid out. And so it's very hard to find those. Once you do find them within the public sector, it's hard to retain them because they're in high demand. You mentioned the Cyber Patriot program. That's a good way to begin training youth, and I know the InfraGuard program is working with them, as well as the FBI. Places like Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, that is setting up a cyber security center to do a lot of that outreach and education for law enforcement, for their own students, and beginning to offer some of those cyber security credentials are starts. But again, it's one thing if you're highly trained out there. Even those companies specializing in those, I'm finding, are having difficulty identifying, acquiring, and retaining them. So I think it's going to be something that we'll struggle with in state service for quite a while to come.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Just one really quick follow-up to Stephanie's comments. What I'm finding both in the cybersecurity and I think just in security in general is that the people that we're bringing on board, or the people that we're grooming for that role, they absolutely have to love what they're doing. They have to love cybersecurity. They have to love digging down in there. And conversely, I think they also have to love the product that you're serving. I've been with DMV for 15 years, and I absolutely love it. It's just like day one. And so the people that we bring on board have to love your product. They have to love what they do.
I appreciate you all answering that. I'm just looking through at all the questions that I've had come in through registration. I think I had 6 of them that specifically asked the question that Herman was talking about. This gentleman right here had a question. Sir?
Hey, good morning. Chris Camejo from NTT Com Security. We're part of the same family with Dimension Data and had a hand in that. Okay. So we had a hand in the Global Threat Intelligence report that was mentioned earlier. And there's a lot of kind of scary numbers in there about patching vulnerabilities. I think it was somewhere around 300 Adobe Flash vulnerabilities came out last year, which is a big factor because it's something around 60-something% of exploits kits use those Adobe Flash vulnerabilities. Another 200 Internet Explorer vulnerabilities in the last year. Just huge numbers of vulnerabilities. So a bit earlier, there's the question about the Section 508 or the compliance with that and purchasing. So my question to you guys is, California has a lot of weight to throw around through purchasing. Is California doing anything similar to that 508 compliance as far as trying to get these vendors to essentially write better software? Instead of worrying about the 0 days and the patches after these vulnerabilities are found, how about kicking them and telling them, hey, here, You need to write better software so that we don't have to put patches on and worry about 0 days.
Can I take a shot at that?
Thanks, Carlos.
So I will tell you we tried, but when you look at the market share that somebody like Microsoft or Adobe has, even California, the size that it is really just a small part of that. So so the short answer is we tried. In some cases, they kind of came back and said, we understand, but in reality, it's very lucrative to release the technology or software before it's fully baked, right? And that's kind of the model that we're all used to, unfortunately. So so we tried, but I'm not sure that it really made that big of an impact.
We have three other panelists. Ash, just one of you guys will do the mic in a second.
Yeah, I think, it's really important to, when we are trying to come up with an application, whether we are buying something, whether it's a COTS product or whether we have an in-house product, it's really important to implement the security controls. So one of the things, I'm going to go back and talk about the Security Jumpstart project, is building security throughout the SDLC cycle is going to allow us to address some of the concerns, some of the things that you mentioned on there. Yeah.
I would just add, it certainly is difficult to assure that new software meets all of the security requirements, but it's an excellent opportunity to put in place the controls around vendor access. And that is probably an equally or more important part.
I can tell you from my experience managing a couple of large state ERPs and the security around that, when we built them, the requirements have always been that you must follow the framework, the standards, the coding must be done in certain language, you must follow OWASP. The reality is, when I've had staff or consultants hacking and testing that code, it's not consistent. It's still flawed. And the reality of what happens is that it's then accepted in large part once you fix it, remediate it, retest it. And that in itself can lead to future vulnerabilities down the road, even though you're secure at one point in time. So.
And real quickly, as a follow-up to Mike, we're required in the CSU to review all information technology procurement for accessibility compliance. And we use that as an opportunity to also review information security compliance at the same time, since we're getting to look at everything from the front. So that's been very helpful to us. We're just adding language throughout the CSU to every procurement contract that requires 508 compliance, and I believe we need to do the same thing for information security compliance.
Anyone else on the panel like to comment? We're going to take a couple more questions and wrap up here. Anyone else like to comment on that?
Just one thing I'd like to add is that obviously I represent a vendor, Gigamon. So we do take the aspects of security very seriously in our products, and not only in our products, but also in our own organization. We have our own security operations center as well, so that we could learn from best practices and advise our customers too. But I would say there are certain best practices that the federal government has taken, which I think would be worth emphasizing here too, and that is the importance of certifications and keeping them current. Right. So, for example, common criteria, things like FIPS 140-2, JTIC in the case of the federal government. I think all of those are good steps that they've taken in terms of making sure that before any procurement happens, you make sure that the products are current and it's not some out-of-date, 2-year-old software. So I think, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the many things that could be done to have the right policies in place.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we have our information security officer sign off on all of our new procurements as well to make sure that they're, work within the security framework that we have. I also wanted to bring up that we have security awareness training. It definitely is a requirement for every year that is redone. And we have it based on the role that the person has within the organization. So And I think that's pretty much a state requirement. So I have gone through the CDT audit ahead of, I think, some of you. And you'll find all of those things that you need to shore up from that process. So it's actually a good thing to go through it.
Based on all the comments that the panel just made about the audit and the training, I wanted to go back to legacy systems. Having worked at a couple of different agencies, the biggest vulnerabilities are in legacy systems. Outdated code, trying to communicate those with newer systems. You're asking people to write in Java, C++, Dashboard, or COBOL, but they're just out of date and they're expensive. And the projects take a long time by the time to implement what you bought is out of date. And so now that there is a new compliance and audit component to CDT, and OES is mainly focused on cybersecurity, from those audits and from this new compliance department, is there going to be a collaborative effort between the Department of Finance and CalHR, CDT, and CalOS to identify those agencies that have very valuable data, and a lot of it that span throughout the state, and come up with a list of who they can give grant funding to, not just who's going to write best BCPs and go and ask for money to get it approved, but coming up with a list of those entities with large legacy systems that have a lot of personal data, PHI, PCI, and assisting them with getting them up to date current, because we're baking security into our new systems. We are, buying software and hardware that is compliant, but we're sitting on a lot of outdated legacy systems that still need to be updated and present the biggest risk to a lot of agencies. And a lot of agencies don't have the money or the personnel and can't get the approval from finance and HR to get done what needs to be done in a short amount of time, efficiently and cost effectively.
That's a great question. Wow. Who wants to take first shot at that hard question?
I'll take the first shot at it, especially since I'm not responsible for that anymore. So the answer is that's not my job. No, I think actually not only is it a good question, but I think you make the case, perfectly that government has to take it seriously. It can't be just about identifying threats. It's about remediating the underlying exposures. And that's exactly what it's going to take. It's going to take a concerted effort between the control agencies and I guess the decision makers in government to say, okay, we have to go out and modernize these legacy technologies. We have to find those vulnerabilities, those exposures, and find ways to get to them. Although I would say it has to be led by the business departments, the line departments. They're the ones that have to come in and say, look, we have a vulnerability, we need help. It can't be the control agencies, because having worked in a couple of control agencies, anytime that we push something forward, we got immediate resistance. And fundamentally, as a control agency, you don't really understand or know what are the priorities, what are the programmatic responsibilities that those departments have in terms of meeting the needs of constituents. Those agencies have to be the ones to say, this is what's important, this is our highest priority. But I think it does have to be a collaborative effort. So having said that, I think the assessments that you're seeing required under AB 670, I think the audits that CDT is doing, I think some of the hearings that you'll see, and some of the renewed focus, I think are going to provide the basis, or at least the underlying components to foster that collaboration. But it's going to take leadership, and it's going to take folks from not the IT side, not the information security office side, but the business side of those departments saying, hey, we need this, and we need to really take this seriously, which means there needs to be a tighter integration and a tighter collaboration at the line department level between the ISO, between the CIO, and their business partners in those agencies. But that's the way it has to happen.
Yeah, so Bill AB 670, it sounds to me it's an enforcer to the policy that's already been existing. And what I envision is after the audits are done, after the assessment is completed, it's going to be a collaborated effort between the entities and the CDT and the CISO office, and it's going to start the conversation of funding. You know, if you really want to remediate these findings right here, you need to get these stopped. Or if you really need to upgrade this legacy system into something new, we need this. So it's going to get business involved. And your CEOs are copied on this right here. So they're aware that their entities are being selected to get this done. So this is the conclusion. I see this as a tool. This is a great tool. All the information security issues or some of the information security issues that we've been seeing on resource, basically, this is going to help us in achieving that.
I was just going to say that the question made me think about the, taking a page out of the playbook of the federal government, right? You probably saw the Cybersecurity National Action Plan that came out around February that put aside $3.1 billion, I think, for an information technology modernization fund. So the federal government is indeed recognizing all the points that was just brought up, and maybe that could be used to help build the case, within the state to actually provide the funding that's necessary to get past these risks.
It's an excellent question, by the way, and I don't have an answer, but I have sort of a path forward that I've kind of taken on, which was after the assessments, we created a dashboard of every one of the systems that weren't compliant, and then similar to what Carlos said, we try and create a linkage back to the customer and have shared responsibility for addressing the issues. But it was a lot more meaningful and gained a lot more visibility when every one of the responsible customers had a clearly articulated dashboard of where they're at. Thank you.
So on that dashboard, I'm sorry, this is like a follow-up question. On the dashboard, what systems that relate to different businesses that might be out of compliance? Is the business unit, which should always be tied to anything designed for IT, also responsible for funding, updating the system, which might be IT procurement, or when you're looking at an infrastructure issue for legacy systems that might touch multiple divisions? Does management at your location say everyone's going to chip in and pay for this? It's not an ISP budget item. It's not
Sure.
this division. Everyone. I mean, that comes from the top down, where the money's going to come from. You just divvy it up evenly.
Sure. Just very briefly, we live and work within a federated environment, so there are some systems that are at an enterprise level and some that are at a department level. So we do have those discussions, and those that are enterprise, there tends to be the chipping in from the different divisions or departments, and then those that are completely decentralized tend to be funded locally.
Between the business and IT, or just IT?
By the business. One approach.
Sean.
So I think this is just a larger issue around the question that you ask, and those that are either currently today control agencies or former control agencies, it's about the climate that exists when we're talking about large-scale legacy systems. We, DMV, we attempted and were successful in modernizing a piece of our legacy environment up to a point. And so it is a funding question, but it's more than a funding question. It's also the question that I think the STAR project is attempting to answer, the question of that lengthy FSR process that puts you 2 or 3 years out, and so now the technology has changed. Only you're locked into this particular type of technology. So I think the climate that we see today really is geared towards helping us to get beyond that hurdle, shortening that process, engaging the parties at the appropriate time throughout that stage gate process, and then secondarily, the agencies, the departments, and all of the control agencies and the partners that we work with, taking that I'm going to say monolithic system and breaking it down into smaller pieces, smaller manageable pieces that we can then handle separately and still accomplish that long-term goal. But I think it's a process, and I think that we as a state really are on the correct path to addressing those issues that still exist out there.
Thanks, Sean. We have, Ananda, did you want to say something? Yes.
If you can just add one more. First of all, I think that's an outstanding question. And if you were to tabulate a list of what are the top 10 risks for a public sector organization, what you brought up is probably one of those risks. We work with a lot of public sector organizations around the world, and one of the things we're constantly amazed is legacy asset tracking is such a big issue. Without taking any specific names, we had one of our partners work with a federal agency, and they found that they had miscounted the number of legacy assets by a factor of 4. Right, so it was almost eye-popping, and what the partner found was that by using the power of network visibility, they could actually determine what were those legacy assets that were communicating on the network and understand, well, why are they, and then use that for further assessments and audits. So it's a very, very critical step, and thank you for bringing that up.
We're going to take one more question, and for everyone whose question we couldn't get to, like I said, we had almost 30 questions come in for registration. One of the things you can do, you all have my email. Send me an email, and I can certainly pass your questions on if they still need to be answered. We're going to take one more question before we conclude.
I'm going to touch on a couple of quick points. Education was brought up earlier. As somebody who's been in a couple of state agencies, and I have a very, very long history in information security, it's very frustrating to see leaders who don't really take security very seriously. So I guess the question I have is, how do we get accountability to the leaders outside of a newspaper headline?
Wow, that's a really good question. Who would like to take Tom, go ahead. Thank you.
I can just share some things. I've had that same challenge that have been effective for me. One I mentioned before is acknowledge that, in business terms, an organization has got to invest its money where it chooses, but make them accountable for that decision. You choose not to invest in this cybersecurity initiative because, and let's move forward. That's been very helpful for me. Another thing that's been helpful, we're governed by a board, which is somewhat different from some of the state agencies, but there's an association, and I may get it wrong, but I think it's the National Association of Corporate Directors. And over the last year or so, they've been very, very tuned into board's accountability for cybersecurity breaches and other mischievous activities. And I've actually used some of that material and put it in front of, our executive management and board members and say, guys, just wake up. This is real.
Carlos, I saw your mic on.
So here's a place where the control agencies can be your friend as well. So the assessments that are the self-assessments and the compliance audits, as part of that process, the findings and the results have to be shared with the leadership of those individual agencies. So that's where you should foster a good relationship with the state ISO or any of the other control agencies that come in and do audits, so that they can help you to make sure that there's accountability at the executive level in those agencies. And not to go rat out on your own agency, but one, you need to foster a relationship if you're an ISO or a CIO with those executives, and then have the control agencies reinforce that, which they will because it's in their charter to do so. But I think those are things that can be leveraged to try and bring accountability to the decision makers in the departments, which oftentimes are not ISOs or are not the CIOs. It's the executive office or the business side.
Excellent point. Stephanie.
Yeah, in my career, I found that, as Carlos mentioned, some of the audits can help you. Communicating, developing a good relationship with your chief internal auditor. Sometimes audits can be your best friends from the security standpoint, and they can help you get visibility into the problem and funding directed your way. The other area where I found was very helpful was, making friends with your chief counsel, talking to the attorneys, getting someone there that you work with regularly on cyber crimes or cyber issues. And when you talk to attorneys about liability, they're very quick to react. And I can tell you that from experience when we had our chief counsel become our executive director. Very easy to talk to him about liability and then work with our CIO to get things moving. So again, you can leverage those kinds of relationships inside your agency or department and then the external ones also.
Thank you, Stephanie. I want to say thank you to you, the audience. This is certainly a riveting discussion. I learned a great deal. I want to thank you for staying a little bit. We still have a full crowd here, staying extra to ask these questions. I'd also ask you to join me in a round of applause. What a great panel we had today. You all were just brilliant. I appreciate it. I also want to acknowledge our sponsors, Cisco, Gigamon, and Dimension Data. Their teams are in the lobby. Their engineers are out there. If you have some questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you. We're going to be doing another security forum next month, and I hope you'll join us. My contact information is here, and like I said, if you had a question that didn't get asked, please send it in to us, and we'll certainly try to get information answered to you. On behalf of the Public Sector Technology Exchange, I want to thank you for joining the Security and Visibility Forum. Make it a great day.